Bonjour les amis, bonjour dear students. My name is Lalit Rao. I'm a French teacher, translator and interpreter, and in today's video I'm going to talk to you about 10 most important French writers of the 19th century. On the historical side, the 19th century in France was a period of Premier Empire from 1804 until 1815 and Second Empire from 1851 until 1870. Putting an end to the French Revolution, Napoleon was crowned emperor in 1804. He took the name of Napoléon III. This was the period of the First Empire. It was during the First Empire that a large part of Europe was conquered. On December 2, 1851, a relative of Napoleon had himself proclaimed emperor under the name of Napoléon III. This is the period of the Second Empire. Initially, it was an authoritarian regime, but later it became liberal. The 19th century was a wonderful period of diversity for literature in France, as it witnessed four major literary movements. They are le Romantisme, le Réalisme, le Parnasse and Le Symbolisme. Each of these movements had specific characteristics. Now it is time for me to talk about these 10 great writers who continue to be read not only by the students and passionate readers in schools, universities and homes of France, but also in many other countries of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I will begin by telling you about the famous French poet Arthur Rimbaud, who was born in 1854 and who died in 1891. Arthur Rimbaud was born on 20th October 1854 in Charleville into a traditional bourgeois and conservative family. The only work which he himself published was Une saison en enfer in 1873. It was a psychological autobiography. His best known poem is Le Bateau Ivre. In September 1871, when he was still not 17, Rimbaud had tucked into his pocket an astonishing poem, Le Bateau Ivre, a maritime allegory of the visionary process, and took leave of Charleville, journeying to Paris to take the literary establishment by storm. Une saison en enfer was completed in the summer of 1873, where Rimbaud described ecstatic visions which he later relinquished because of the physical torment they entailed. In the final days of his life, Rimbaud had a cancerous tumor in his right knee. He leaves Ethiopia and returned to France. In Marseille, the doctors decide to amputate, but Rimbaud dies on 10th November 1891 at the age of 37. Some of his famous poems are Nuit de l'Enfer, Matin, Adieu, Aube, Fleur and Vagabond. Now I move on to the second great writer of the 19th century, the famous French poet Charles Baudelaire, who was born in 1821 and who died in 1867. Symbolist poet Charles Baudelaire was born in Paris on 9th April 1821. Baudelaire was associated with two cults of art and dandyism. Baudelaire devoted much of the first half of the 1850s to translate American short story writer Edgar Allan Poe's tales in French, which he had encountered in 1847. In 1857, Charles Baudelaire published his major work, the collection of poems Les Fleurs du Mal. This work is condemned for insulting public morals and good customs. With his publisher, Baudelaire had to pay a heavy fine and delete certain passages. In 1860, he published Les Paradis Artificiels. Then the following year, a new version of Les Fleurs du Mal expurgated of the 6 disputed poems. Baudelaire stayed in Belgium from 1864 to 1866 to escape his debts and give lectures there. In 1866, Baudelaire experienced serious health problems. He is stricken with both hemiplegia and aphasia, loss of speech. A year after his return to Paris on 31st August 1867, Baudelaire died at the age of 46. Unrecognized during his lifetime, Baudelaire only passed on to posterity after his death. Some of his famous poems are Allegorie, À une passante, Au lecteur, Bohémien en voyage, Correspondance, Chant d'automne, and Harmonie du soir. Now I move on to the third most important of the 19th century. François-René de Chateaubriand was born in 1768 and he died in 1848. François-René de Chateaubriand was born on 4th September 1768 in Saint-Malo. Coming from a wealthy aristocratic family, he began a military career, then entered the court at the age of 19. He was the founder of Romanticism in French literature, champion of the Catholic renewal. In 1791-92, Chateaubriand traveled to America in hope of finding the elusive Northwest Passage. This voyage resulted in the publication of 2 romances in the tradition of Rousseau's Noble Savage, Atala in 1801 and René in 1805. Le génie du christianisme ou beauté de la religion chrétienne in 1802 was a brilliant success at a time Napoleon was restoring Catholicism to France as the state religion. Chateaubriand translated Milton's Paradise Lost and prepared his autobiography Mémoires d'Outre-Tombe 1848 to 1850, a phenomenal work that makes better reading than his fiction. It dwells on his formative years, the dreams of adolescence, vivid sketches of important political and literary figures. Through this autobiographical account, combining both memories and reflections, Chateaubriand retraces the 70 years of his life. Some of the legendary figures of French literature, such as Alphonse de Lamartine, Flaubert, and Hugo, were all influenced by him. As a kid, Victor Hugo used to write in his notebooks, "I want to be Chateaubriand or nothing." Ladies and gentlemen, it's time now for me to talk to you about Émile Zola, who was born in 1840 and who died in 1902. Zola was born in Paris but spent his childhood and youth from 1843 to 1858 in Aix-en-Provence, where he formed a close friendship with Impressionist painter Paul Cézanne. Zola promoted a scientific view of literature inspired by the aims and methods of physiology, which he termed naturalisme. His fourth novel, Thérèse Raquin, 1867, applied these ideas and attracted some critical attention. Zola's first novel to achieve major success was L'Assommoir in 1877, a work that brought him not only fame and fortune but also considerable hostile criticism. His literary career was launched with the success of Conte a Nino in 1864. Zola's Rougon-Macquart series from 1871 until 1893 had 20 volumes. It traced the natural and social history of a family under the Second Empire and covered the histories of family occupations, farmer, miner, city worker, scholar, prostitute, artist, statesman, laundress, etc. During his last years, Zola played an essential part in the Dreyfus affair by calling public attention to it with a ringing open letter in the newspaper L'Aurore dated 13th January 1898 to the French President Félix IV entitled J'accuse, in which he protested against the acquittal of the spy Ferdinand Esterhazy in the Dreyfus affair. On 29 September 1902, Émile Zola died of carbon monoxide poisoning from a blocked chimney in his Parisian apartment. Ladies and gentlemen, now I move on to one of the most important writers of the 19th century, the writer who wrote Madame Bovary. Dear students and my dear friends, I am talking to you about Gustave Flaubert, who was born in 1821 and who died in 1880. Gustave Flaubert was born on December 12, 1821 in Rouen. He was the inventor of naturalism. American author Henry James called him the writer's writer in recognition of his obsession with the literary form. Flaubert's father and brother were both physicians, and this medical clinical environment left its mark on his work. He went to Paris to study law, but liked neither the city nor the profession. With meticulous attention to securing the absolutely right word, le mot juste, in the right place, Gustave Flaubert developed a brilliant prose style which seemed on the surface to be disarmingly direct and simple. For his first published work, Madame Bovary, in 1857, Flaubert worked for over 5 years. This work was greeted by a government prosecution of author and publisher on grounds of outrage of public morals and religion. He was acquitted in the same year of the criminal charge of publishing a morally offensive book. The trial ensured the success of Madame Bovary. L'Éducation sentimentale, published in 1869, is about a young country boy coming of age in Paris. Flaubert described it as the moral, or more accurately, the sentimental history of his own generation. The generation at issue is Flaubert's own, and his protagonist, Frédéric Moreau, undergoes the great experience of that generation, the revolution of 1848 and its aftermath. On May 8, 1880, Flaubert died of a stroke, leaving his last work, the great comic masterpiece Bouvard and Pécuchet, unfinished on his table. The novel is interrupted at the last chapter of the first volume, Education. Flaubert was an inspiration to many realistic writers such as Guy de Maupassant, Émile Zola, Henry James, and Turgenev. Now, I move on to one of the great writers of the French literature, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear students. I'm talking to you about Guy de Maupassant, who was born in 1840 and who died in 1893. Guy de Maupassant was born on August 5, 1850, probably in Fécamp in Seine-Maritime. Guy de Maupassant was Flaubert's heir apparent, a naturalist writer, the master of the short story and inventor of the psychological fantasy. Maupassant is usually associated with naturalism and contributed to Les Soirées de Meudon, the story Boule de Suif, which launched his literary career. It was published in 1880 and was a superb tale, the satirical portrait of human selfishness related with ironic wit. Maupassant made his mark as a master of the short story. His collections of contes and nouvelles include La Maison Tellier 1881, Mademoiselle Fifi 1882, Conte de la Bécasse 1883, Miss Harriet 1884, Les Sœurs Rondoli 1884, Toine 1886, Conte du jour et de la nuit 1886, La Orla 1887 and L'Inutile Beauté 1890. All these works deal with the meanness of peasant life, the mediocrity and hypocrisy of bourgeois manners, and the vanities of high society. Maupassant's works are marked by a profound pessimism, nourished by his readings of the great German idealist philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. With La Orla, Maupassant made an important contribution to the genre of the fantastic tale. In the last years of his life, Maupassant suffered from nervous disorders due to syphilis. Depressed, physically diminished, and gradually sinking into madness, he died on July 6, 1893 at the age of 43. Our next writer, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear students, my dear friends, is Honoré de Balzac, who was born in 1799 and who died in 1850. French writer Honoré de Balzac was born in Tours on 20th May 1799. He was a historian of the human ways of life, a creator of the universe, a precursor of the realism, a convict of literature. His novels reflect his revolt against the well-to-do middle-class family. The theme of money pervades his novels, and his main characters are in search of wealth and social positions. In 1829, Balzac began La Comédie Humaine, the human comedy series, with the novel Le Dernier Chouan. In nearly 100 novels and short stories, the Comédie Humaine realistically studies every social class and touches on most fields of knowledge. Balzac first achieved public success in 1830 with La Peau de Chagrin, which is also known in the Anglophone world as The Magic Skin. It is a philosophical tale written in a brilliant, irreverent, and wittily romantic style. Eugénie Grandet, 1833, tells the story of a young woman whose wealthy but tight-fisted father tries to arrange the most financially advantageous marriage for her when she falls in love with her penniless cousin. Le Père Goriot, 1835, is about the life in Paris, whose narrator is unknown, objective, and omniscient. It is possible to see some of Balzac's personal thoughts in the novel. It spurred the use of Rastignac in French to mean someone with cutthroat social ambitions. In 1845, Balzac sought to give a firmer structure to La Comédie Humaine and decided that the complete work would include 137 novels, which he grouped into three parts: study of manners, philosophical studies, and analytical studies. After having suffered enormously due to successive heart attacks, suffocation, and bronchitis, Balzac died on August 18, 1850, shortly after marrying the Polish noblewoman Eve Hanska. Now, I am talking to you about Paul Verlaine, the famous poet who was born in 1844 and who died in 1896. Paul Verlaine was born on 30th April 1844 in Metz. He was a poet of contrast, moods, and musical lyricism. He is sometimes seen as the precursor of the French symbolist poets of the 1880s. His main poetical works were Poème Saturnin 1866, Fête Galante 1869, La Bonne Chanson 1870, Romance sans parole 1873, Sagesse 1880, Jadi et Naguère 1885, Amour 1888, Parallèlement 1889, Bonheur 1891, Chanson pour elle 1891. There were three major events which upset Verlaine's life between 1870 and 1871: the Commune, the Siege of Paris, and Arthur Rimbaud. His tumultuous relationship with the cursed poet Rimbaud took him to England and then to Belgium. He was imprisoned for shooting Rimbaud. He left to teach in England. Upon his release, Verlaine sank into debauchery and alcohol and died on 8 January 1896 in Paris. Verlaine was not a thinker but a creator of moods derived from his own sensations and shifting aspirations. He rejected vers libre, preferring vers libéré, which he defined authoritatively in Art Poetique. Our next writer, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear students, is Stendhal, who was born in 1783 and who died in 1842. French writer Stendhal was a man of passion, master of the subjective realism, champion of improvisation. The term Bellism is used to suggest Stendhal's strong belief in the life energy man uses to pursue love and power. He was first of the great psychological novelists and was the contemporary of Walter Scott, Balzac and Goethe. Stendhal was an acute student of human motive and character. Stendhal was born as Henri Bell in Grenoble on 23rd January 1783. With his taste for adventure, he joins the army in 1800 and leaves Paris for Italy. His love for Italy leads him to settle in Milan in 1814. The psychology of love was dissected with considerable finesse by Stendhal in two realistic novels, Le Rouge et le Noir 1830 and La Chartreuse de Parme in 1839. It is said that the La Chartreuse de Parme influenced the great Russian writer Leo Tolstoy in his writing of his classical novel War and Peace. Stendhal wanted to be the Molière of his time. The comic element is strong in his writings, which are full of critical, often biased accounts of contemporary life. He aimed to feel like the great Rousseau but write like Montesquieu. It is this mixture of the hard and the soft, the cynical and the tender, the ironic and the passionate that the particular charm of his writing lies. Stendhal died on March 23, 1842 in Paris from a stroke. He was 59 years old and was buried in Montmartre Cemetery. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for me to talk to you about one great writer who is not only known in France but all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen and my dear students, I am talking to you about the writer of Les Miserables, Victor Hugo, who was born in 1802 and who died in 1885. Victor Hugo, who was born in 1802 and who died in 1885. Victor Hugo was the creator of romantic drama, first versifier of the 19th century and the defender of the oppressed. Although Hugo was widely popular as novelist and dramatist, his lasting reputation depended on his verse. He was the leader of the Romantic school between 1830 and 1850. He dominated flow and bold originality of his work until his death. Gustave Flaubert called him the immense vieux. Victor Hugo was born on 26 February 1802 in Besançon. He was the last child in a family of 3 boys. His father Leopold was a general of the Napoleonic Empire. It was his mother Sophie who raised him. While at Lycée Louis le Grand, Victor Hugo seemed to have a very precise idea of his future. At 14, he wrote, "I want to be Chateaubriand or nothing." Hugo was translated into many languages before his death and was read by a popular as well as an intellectual public. Victor Hugo's work has had a wide-ranging influence. By the age of 13, Hugo had already begun writing stories and classical tragedies. The culmination of Hugo's meteoric rise to fame came in October 1830 with the performance of Ernani, a play that recounts the tragic love story between the titular character, a former noble who became a bandit after being banished, and a young woman named Donna Sol de Silvia, who has 2 other suitors, namely her uncle Don Rui Gomez and Don Carlos, the King of Spain. Ernani inspired heated debates when it was first performed because of the way it blended tragic and comic elements and disregards the conventions of classical theatre. Like his plays, Hugo's novels combined fantastic characters and sentimental exaggeration with some scenes of great emotional power. Notre Dame de Paris, 1831, is a picturesque evocation of the swarming life of the 15th century, in which Quasimodo, the hunchback bell ringer, serves as a human gargoyle. It is set in Paris and centers on his unrequited love for the beautiful dancer La Esmeralda. Esmeralda, born Agnès, is perceived to be a French Roma girl. Les Miserables, 1862, is both melodramatic as well as sensational. It is a book of chaos of genre and subjects ranging from battles to the sewers of Paris. It was also a vehicle for Hugo's social ideas. Men are essentially equal. The poor are crushed by the prejudices of the organized society. Les Miserables centers on its principal character, Jean Valjean, an ex-convict in 19th century France. The story spans many years as it tells of Valjean's release from prison and reformation as an industrialist while being constantly pursued by the morally strict Inspector Javert. A lot is said about Hugo's vanity, which was not entirely unjustified. He once thought that the city of Paris should be renamed Hugo in his honor, as among his 50 volumes there are many masterpieces. After his death, the body of Victor Hugo is exposed on the night of May 31, 1885 under the L'Arc de Triomphe. The next day, 2 million people followed his funeral procession to the Pantheon. So, ladies and gentlemen, these were the 10 important writers of the 19th century French literature. I hope that you have enjoyed watching this video. I'll quickly show you the photos of some of the writers. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Arthur Rimbaud. This is the poet Charles Baudelaire. This is the writer François René de Chateaubriand. This is Émile Zola, writer of Germinal and Nana. This is the writer of Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert. Next is the famous French short story writer Guy de Maupassant. The next writer is the famous French writer Honoré de Balzac, who is famous for his La Comédie Humaine. Next is the poet Paul Verlaine, writer of Le Rouge et le Noir, Stendhal is shown in this photo. And finally, this is Victor Hugo, the writer of the French literature classic Les Miserables. So ladies and gentlemen and my dear students, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you have liked this video as I worked hard on making this video. Thank you very much for all your support and dedication. I hope that you will recommend FLCC channel to all your friends, relatives and well-wishers. Merci beaucoup and au revoir.